Okay, welcome to day 2 of our Tao Te Ching study. We are working through verses 5 through 8, or I guess chapters 5 through 8. We'll start out by reading the entirety of the text from the annotated and explained version by Derek Lin, and then we're going to look at each of these chapters side by side with a couple of other translations as well. All right, verse 5. Heaven and earth are impartial and regard myriad things as straw dogs. The sages are impartial and regard people as straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth, is it not like a bellows, empty and yet never exhausted? It moves and produces more. Too many words hasten failure, cannot compare to keeping quiet. The valley spirit, undying, is called the mystic female. The gateway of the mystic female is called the root of heaven and earth. It flows continuously, barely perceptible. When utilized, it is never exhausted. Chapter 7. Heaven and earth are everlasting. The reason heaven and earth can last forever is that they do not exist for themselves. Thus, they can last forever. Therefore, the sages place themselves last but end up in front, are outside of themselves and yet survive. Is it not all due to their selflessness? That is how they can achieve their own goals. Chapter 8. The highest goodness resembles water. Water greatly benefits myriad things without contention. It stays in places that people dislike. Therefore, it is similar to the Tao. Dwelling at the right place, heart with great depth, giving with great kindness, words with great integrity, governing with great administration, handling with great capability, moving with great timing. Because it does not contend, it is therefore beyond reproach. Guys, this has given me life this week. So, heading back to verse 5. Let's go through this in the 3 different translations, and I've kind of broken it out verse by verse. So we're going to try to do that, and y'all tell me what you think. With the version that we just read, the annotated and explained, heaven and earth are impartial and regard myriad things as straw dogs. From the translation that's in front of you guys, the earth and the stars do not take sides, they are impartial. And then from the version you are holding, Jess, the Tao doesn't take sides, it gives birth to both good and evil. So let's look at the first note for this. It says the original Chinese characters Bu Ren are often mistranslated as ruthless or without compassion. This produces statements at odds with reality because real life sages are compassionate individuals, hard, ruthless. The true meaning of Bu Ren is that the Tao does not play favorites. The rainwaters, weeds, and orchids equally. The sun shines on everyone with the same brightness and warmth, despite variations in individual merits. The sage, in emulating the Tao, also regards everyone in the same egalitarian light, none higher and none lower. So if we look at the definition of the word impartial, it says that they don't favor one another. So, when we're looking up at the stars and listening to these astrological forecasts, the planets aren't playing favorites. God isn't playing favorites. The universe isn't playing favorites. It's just ebbing and flowing in the way that it does, and we can either ebb and flow with it, like a piece of seaweed in the ocean, or we can struggle upstream. What are you guys' thoughts on this? Heaven and earth not really caring whether your best interest is any merit at all.
I think I think it's kind of leaning towards, well, it's kind of suggesting that it's not it's like it's almost like a scientific kind of description of the universe, facts, not feelings. It's not it's not sort of burdened by or emotioned by any kind of humanistic trait like feelings or reason or anything like that. It just is. So the first two kind of translations, I think, lean slightly towards the figurative, whereas the third translation, I would say, suggests is possibly a bit more literal. The earth and the stars, I'm assuming, and heaven and the earth are as the Tao, the Tao, excuse me. So yeah, that's why I'd say that's a more figurative interpretation of the text, because the third one refers to the Tao as the Tao, and not the earth and the stars or heaven. Yeah.
I think Katie's echoing your sentiments in the chat. So, what do you guys think this? How does this relate to the whole? Oh, Mother Nature is pissed and trying to correct herself, and that's why we're having all of these natural disasters and things like that. I mean, is that even a valid narrative?
I mean, I guess if you were gonna make that connection, I'd be tempted to say that Mother Nature isn't pissed. It will just respond with balance. If the Earth and stars don't take sides, and yeah, I imagine that. I mean, I would say that it's more likely that I would find it a more relatable thing to say that Mother Nature will just readdress the balance.
Yeah. But it's interesting when you use the word respond. I think of it kind of like the displacement of water. If you have a bowl full of water and you put something in it and it displaces the water, it just responds in that way. But it's not really good, bad, or indifferent. It may overflow. It may not. Jess, do you have something to add?
Oh, I was just looking in the chat, and what Katie wrote hit me like a rock, because in my book I've been putting post-its on each of like the chapters, the books, or whatever you want to call them. And one of my post-its says, "It just is," period. And that's what she has in the chat. It just is. It's not taking sides. It's not choosing favorites. It's not for our harm or for our benefit. It just is. And like I'm sorry, John, right? Like John was saying, I think as humans, we are really quick to just think of like material world. So we're trying to put Mother Earth as like this mother of the earth, like this, female figure, and it's a lie, which Earth is a lie. But anyway, we're trying to put like an entity to it, to make sense of it in our head. It's not pissed off at us. It just is. It's just doing what it does in the Tao.
I always feel like some people need that personification of the elements to understand how they work. I think that's why so many people use that.
For sure.
And I'm definitely one of those people. I've done it too, and I still do it. I bury things outside for I do a lot of things. I'm in a lot of things.
I think the idea of Mother Nature in general is both receptive and nurturing. At least that's the way I take it to me. I feel like, especially in the next chapter that we're discussing, we're going to see that personification fleshed out a little bit more. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
we won't continue down that route because we're going to get to that. But
Okay.
did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a valuable tool as well to attribute human characteristics to things like animals and natural forces and stuff, because especially in the case of the planet Earth, because I mean, mother is a title that is, and at least should be, held in the highest regard. So you know, by giving it that kind of, I guess, by giving it that kind of identity, already you're implying that people should be respectful and caring and considerate, and like a mother does it. It's kind of, we're not here without it, are we?
Yeah. Well, so I just wanna stop and acknowledge for a minute, and I really feel like I speak for all of the women here at the moment and any others that would be watching, that the statement you just made, John, as a mother, hit me in the heart. Like that means a lot, and it also reminds me to make sure that I treat my mother with decency and respect. You know what I mean? But you know, I think we talk a lot as ladies about how it's kind of a thankless job. So you know, to hear that moms deserve that is important. So thanks.
No. I mean, it's just a fact, isn't it? I mean, it really is. I mean, I'm a single parent. I'm a father. But you know, I absolutely encourage the utmost respect for mothers, purely because one day my daughter's probably going to be one. You know, and as you say, it's G.K. Chesterton was an author, Christian author, and he wrote some incredible things about mothers and women as well, and how every human being is feminized by default because they are birth of women, and also back in England, I think it was sort of post World War II, women had an incredible fortitude in terms of helping hold families together, and there was a tradition of them being staunchly loyal to their husbands, regardless of how much of a train wreck they might have been. But yeah, no, it's well documented. So I mean, phenomenal amount of strength comes from mothers, both in community and family. So I don't try and say that to win brownie points, but it's the case.
No, but well, and I think that that goes both ways, though. I think strong fathers
For
are
sure.
important in the community as well. I don't think that the community would function properly without both.
And that's I mean, that's probably, I mean, when you think about it, it's probably why the two kind of greatest forces we consider as human beings, which we have given identity to, God and our Earth. You know, a lot of people label them father and mother. You know, which you know, I mean, it sings a lot to the importance of those roles.
Excellent stuff. Any other things you ladies like to add? Or did you throw your 2 cents in it? Okay. So this next part, the sages are impartial and regard people as straw dogs. They regard all individuals as insignificant, as though they are playthings made of straw. The master doesn't take sides. She welcomes both saints and sinners. So there's some very different translations there. But straw dogs are literally small dog figurines made from straw. They were used in ancient times for rituals and then discarded after use. It is a striking metaphor when we consider how we are similar to the straw dogs. We are here to go through the ritual called life. When the ritual is done, there is no further use for the physical body, so it is discarded. How do you guys feel about that? The sages don't worry too much about the physical body. They can discard it with no care.
Well, it's interesting. It's tricky to sort of fixate on because when you look at the other translations, there's some conflict of meaning there. I think that the Tao doesn't take sides and the sages are impartial. Two different statements.
Well, so remember this, the one in blue is kind of shifted down a little bit. So this is saying the master, so this would be the sage, the master doesn't take sides. She welcomes both saints and sinners. So instead of saying
me.
that these are the straw dogs, they're insignificant.
Do you know what I've done? I've because they're slightly not
Yeah.
parallel. I've read.
Sorry.
So sorry, not focused on the
That's
down.
probably my
Yeah,
fault.
no, not at all. Yeah, no, that's not so bad then. Yeah, the master takes side. So yeah, no, that is different completely. My apologies.
No, like I said, that's probably because I did it that way.
I don't understand. Well, I do understand that, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. I get that. So our physical bodies, we're here one moment and gone the next, at least the physical bodies are. But in the middle, that translation that you have, it says, they regard all individuals as insignificant. Okay, that's okay. As though they are playthings made of straw. Why? I don't understand that part. What are they translating there? I don't know.
Well,
Because I feel like they summed it up in the first. They regard all individuals as insignificant. I don't know.
so remember, they're just kind of reiterating the point that these are things that are just meant to be used through this ritual of life and then discarded. I would assume to head on to the next life or back to the whole, the universal consciousness, whatever. Personally, my take on it is that there's multiple lifetimes that we go through and lessons that we learn, and whether or not that's simultaneous and there's multiple timelines all at once, or it's a progression of lifetimes, I think is kind of irrelevant, but that we continue to flow through until we've picked up everything we've needed to pick up, and then we go back to source. A lot like water, and we'll talk a lot more about water as we continue on.
Is there any place to put in for an upgrade? Or
Maybe.
just kidding. for my play thing, I need an upgrade.
Oh, well, but so okay, let's look at that in terms of your thought process behind that. What makes you feel like you need an upgrade?
My spine. I would like a spine that's not in the shape of an S.
So make it not be in the shape of an S. I mean, I know that sounds kind of ridiculous and almost even maybe a bit callous. So forgive me if it sounds that way, but
No, I actually I'll cut you off right there because I was looking through the years of the curvature of my spine, the degrees, and it changes. So you're not wrong. I mean, there was at one point that I had a 40-degree curve, and that 40 is now at 36. So I feel like I'm making progress, even though I didn't know how or what I was, doing to make it better, but it can get better. I don't know exactly how, but I'm working on it.
Well, so my first thought would be, what baggage are you carrying around? And obviously, no, I don't mean like a literal backpack. I mean, what energetic baggage, what monkey do you still have lashed onto your back that would cause you to remain in a curvature? I mean, the same would apply to any of us who are experiencing any kind of energy or discomfort. I'm sorry, injury or discomfort, including myself. I have really evaluated whatever emotional triggers are cause for pain, and I think that there's a lot to be said about working on our own healing.
Well, and sometimes it's not even our healing, you know, that it didn't come from my generation or whatnot, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. Katie knows what I'm talking about.
But that I think it's worth talking about for a second, though. I mean, you call this a rabbit hole. I think this is important because we are all, you know, this. We regard ourselves as solely these unique individuals, and while we are on a soul level and maybe even on a physical level, although many of us have doppelgangers and things like that, I think that um, we are so completely one with one another and unique simultaneously, but we are not just a singular organism. We are entire living communities of organisms. So imagine for a second, you've got, let's say you have an apartment building with 70 trillion people living in it. Okay. And they're all interacting, some of them in good ways and some of them in not so great ways, right? This is the human body. I mean, it's impossible to have it be all harmonious all at the same time. Or is it? Do you think it is possible?
I think it is possible. And I think that's when we essentially, I don't know if this is the right way of saying it, but enter the Tao or become more aware of the Tao. Because the Tao is always forever present and everywhere. But when we are able to get to that mindset, when everything just feels perfect and perfect timing, perfect place, and at peace, I don't know.
I was going to say, I was trying to work out whether or not you were referring to things which are indigenous to the human body, like good fauna, good bacteria in our guts, and that type of thing, or were you referring to absolutely everything? Because in terms of parasites and that sort of thing, then obviously we probably shouldn't be embracing those too much because they're parasites for a reason. But on the flip side, if you're talking, I guess, about things which occur and should be occurring naturally on this, then yeah, I think so. And I think the problem we have now is we're a species that for about the last 200 years haven't been eating naturally or normally. You know, we went for about 2 million years of a relatively regulated diet when we were in a Paleolithic period. I hope I pronounced that right. Paleolithic period. I think they've sort of estimated it was about 2 million years of a pretty standardized diet, maybe eating once or twice a day, raw foods, cooked meat, and not much of it either. And then since the rise of industry and agriculture and profiteering companies, we've slowly but surely, not slowly but surely, but we've all of a sudden completely deviated from what we've evolved from for the last 2 million years. So yeah, I mean, it might be difficult to do it for a while. You know, we are in a state of flux now. Yeah, that's why there's so much modern illness about. I mean, a lot of the things we suffer with in this day and age just did not exist 200 years ago.
But, and we're going to get to this as well with regards to the Tao, we are highly adaptive. I mean, the human race has had some major adaptations. So I feel like a lot of that is not necessarily something that requires technology or anything like that, but that we can manifest within ourselves.
Of course, there are people doing it now. Certainly, there are people doing it now.
Even with the negative things that you're like parasites and things like that, and being aware of the fact that they can change our brain chemistry enough to cause us to think differently and require different things for their survival instead of our own, or at least to our detriment. I think it's really important for us to maybe even learn to live more symbiotically with viruses and parasites, if that's even possible. And Katie and I have been talking about doing like parasite cleanses a lot, and maybe that's the answer, maybe just eliminating those things. I mean, I do kind of feel, and forgive me if this sounds callous as well, but um, as a human being, I feel like sometimes you have to cut certain people out of your life if they're being inherently negative or something like that. And that sometimes, you know, we don't want to dust our feet off and move on to the next town. We want to keep helping someone and keep loving on them and caring about them. But when they're being self-destructive and they're kind of pulling us down into the pit, sometimes we have to cut them off as well because they're kind of being parasitic, right? Do you guys feel like that is something that is in line with the Tao or not?
Yeah, I think I don't see why not. I think it's a struggle for me because when I sort of transitioned from Buddhism to Christianity, one of my criticisms of a lot of Eastern philosophy and belief was this kind of extinguishing of wonder and imagination, specifically in Zen Buddhism, which was what I kind of focused on when I was in Buddhism. It was seeing things as they are, and not subjecting your own person, personality on them or other personalities on them, just to see them in almost a raw, binary way. Not binary, that's a bad way to describe it, but I guess the Tao is really, from what I understand, it's not necessarily suggesting to do that, or not to speak figuratively or write poetry or this sort of thing, or judge people. It's simply telling you how the world is actually working. It's showing us how things are working. I mean, how we navigate through it, it's still up to us. And I mean, as human beings, there are reasons we can't live perfectly. It's all about mistakes and correction and error, and trying to find that right path. But so I think, yeah, I don't see how it would conflict with it. I think if you were doing it for reasons that weren't for the greater good, then yeah. If you were trying to choose an easy path, and somebody was in difficulty, so you're just going to start subscribing to that belief while they're causing me more stress than I want to deal with. So I'm going to remove them because that makes things easier for me. And I may wave the virtuous flag at some point and say it's because I wanted to move on and help other people more deserving of it, then yeah, then that's not right. But I think if somebody's just, I mean, the other religions believe in this as well, don't they? Christianity says at some point there are going to be some people not to waste time with, and it might be a bit of pill to swallow for some, but for myself, not really. I think you have to extend it. It would be the reasonable thing to do if somebody's that destructive.
I think it goes back to discernment, realizing that discernment. What do you mean, Katie, that you said you feel society causes constructs to our flow? Do you mean constriction? Elaborate on that one. So, filling us with opinions, judgments of others, and further away from ourselves. Yeah. Okay. So you feel like society kind of manipulates us to be the way they want us to flow.
Well, that's what the news is. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, I feel that's what, like, politics and the news is the media trying to sway one way or the other, and it's the furthest thing away from the Tao. The Tao doesn't take sides, you know.
And Katie said more selfish too. I absolutely agree that society has been kind of navigated into this very selfish mindset. And I agree, Katie. It does cause our resistance to the Tao. And the funny thing is, though, I feel like the Tao is so free flowing. We can enter and leave its stream at any time. But it's just choosing whether or not to enter into the stream of that, or to fight against it and swim upstream, right? Um, so on that note, this next part, the space between heaven and earth is not like about, or is it not like a bellows, empty and yet never exhausted? It moves and produces more. The space between earth and the stars is like a bellows. It is empty but does not collapse. As it contracts, it creates. The Tao is like a bellows. It is empty yet infinitely capable. The more you use it, the more it produces. The more you talk of it, the less you understand. This idea of expansion in the midst of contraction is a perfect example of being on two ends of the same spectrum, right? We talk about this all the time, and I always utilize like a temperature gauge or the electromagnetic spectrum. You have one extreme, you have another, but they're both on the same scale, right? A bellows being the same in that it's always either taking in air or pushing air out. But even in pushing air out, it's doing something. It's helping to kind of fan the flames of the fire. And it's constantly producing without much effort. And I would even say producing from the things that it's taking in. So it's almost like a recycling, right? It breathes life into a fire as well, you know, if it's a bellows. Too many words here means too much bureaucracy or too many rules and regulations. So this last bit with too many words hasten failure, cannot compare to keeping quiet. I like this translation. Gossips, by contrast, spew out words till they are empty because they are not impartial. And then this one here, the more you talk of it, the less you understand. So it reminds me a lot of what Christ said about the Pharisees adding to the law, right? There is this sort of law of the universe, this law of existence anyway, that maintains balance within all of creation. But the problem that Christ had with the Pharisees was that they were creating additional rules and regulations. Well, in this middle translation here, the pink copy, gossips spew out words. So I feel like that's kind of interesting that they chose to use gossips for that translation. And personally, I feel like it adds a bit more depth to the meaning of it. Not only are we to be careful using too many rules or regulations, too much bureaucracy within our spiritual experience, but even in the context of our relationships with other people, we should not be entertaining gossip. We should not be unnecessarily talking about things that we don't have any business talking about. You know what I mean?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was just wondering then while you were talking about it, and typically there's a negative agenda to gossip, isn't there? I don't think gossip is ever just completely impartial or neutral. If Martin's cheating on his wife and you're gossiping about him, you're gossiping either because you want to shame him, or maybe you're envious, or something else, or you want to cause damage, or you want his wife to eventually find out and for them to separate. Because you see what I mean? I don't see in any way where gossip is innocent or just it's always pretty there's always some kind of a negative agenda.
Undertone.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like a lot of times when I see other people gossiping, the first thing I notice is their disdain for themselves. It's like they don't love and honor themselves enough to refrain from, being making themselves feel better at someone
Mm.
else's expense. That I don't know, that's always kind of troubled me. I prefer to kind of stay away from gossip.
And the other thing I was going to say as well is look what happens when gossip spews over and the wrong people find out you've been gossiping.
Yeah.
Is it ever a positive reaction? Which is then indicative of the nature of gossip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, have you guys ever seen that movie Gossip? It had Kate Hudson, Joshua Jackson, Norman Reedus, um, oh, and Lena Headey from Game of Thrones. Anyway, that movie, they made up a rumor, and it was for their class. They were trying to determine how quickly a rumor would travel, and they made up a rumor and kind of snowballed and became this huge thing. It was a very clever movie, but it showed the damage that gossip can do because at one point, a young man, even though he wasn't guilty of any crime, was under suspicion of committing a heinous crime because someone started a rumor. Now that's terrible. And how many times have people's lives been destroyed by something that simply wasn't true? I love that, Katie. Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. I agree. A bajillion%. That's why
A bit of Holly.
we great minds are
A
discussing
bajillion.
ideas. Yes, a bajillion. We are great minds over here discussing some ideas, right? Okay, so this last bit about keeping quiet. Here's a note here. It says, I have translated the last character, Zhong, as quiet. This can be confusing even to native Chinese speakers. According to the dictionary, it means middle or center. Thus, one may assume the last line has to do with centering oneself or holding on to the principle of moderation. This is probably not correct because the previous line is not about the danger of extremes. The real meaning of zhong in ancient times and in this particular context is silence. When we see how the maddening noise of complex bureaucracy and too many laws hasten failure, we would naturally want to reach for its opposite, the quietness of simplicity. So keep it simple, right? Hold on to the center. Be still and know that I am God, right? This idea of not giving into the chaos, not giving into the panic and the anxiety and the worry of what may never be. How many times do we worry ourselves to death over things that don't need our time, don't need our energy or our effort at all? Just some notes that I had here about the universe being ever expanding also while contracting. I was just thinking of beauty out of pain, and the good and the bad and the bad and the good, just like the yin yang. Self-regulation and preservation of our energy. Amen, sister. Know what to allow to captivate your attention and what to not allow to captivate your attention. Okay, I don't have a ton of notes on chapter 6, but the valley spirit undying is called the mystic female. The gateway of the mystic female is called the root of heaven and earth. It flows continuously, barely perceptible. When utilized, it is never exhausted. The spirit of the perennial spring is said to be immortal. She is called the mysterious one. The mysterious one is the source of the universe. She is continually, endlessly giving forth life without effort. The Tao is called the Great Mother, empty, yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it any way you want. Okay, so for our first note here, the spirit of the valley is a powerful symbol for yin, the universal female principle. It is eternal. It has always existed and will always exist. This principle has many names. We can call it the sacred feminine or the mystic female. We have the mystic female is the ultimate source of all living things. The ancient Chinese noted that women were responsible for the miracle of life and therefore had to possess a measure of divine power. They respected this power and regarded it as the basis of existence, the root of heaven and earth. The essence of life itself is a continuous flow. We may take it for granted and not pay attention to it, but it is always there. Because life begets life, its power extends indefinitely into the future. It does not matter how much we utilize, we can never use it up. As Tao cultivators, we are in tune with this essence. We recognize the goddess in every woman and celebrate the sacred power of the feminine. Let us be mindful of the truth that we all come from the mystic female, without which none of us can exist. Did you read ahead a little bit, John? I said, did you read ahead a little bit? That's exactly what you had said earlier. So one of the things that came to me today as I was getting out of the shower was the Tao is non-attachment. It does not hold on to outcomes or anticipate. It simply flows. I feel like as a mom, we have to embrace non-attachment. And I know at least for those of us who are here as moms, we haven't gotten to that point yet. But at some point, our little birds are going to leave the nest. And as much as we love our children and pour into our children, we have to learn non-attachment at some point in our lives, whether we like it or not. How do you guys feel about all of this, about coming from the great mother, about, learning to just kind of flow, even this continuous flow without ever actually being used up? And does that really apply to us presently?
The only way that I can think that it applies presently in my life is the love that I feel. Because my energy definitely feels depleted a lot, and I have to sleep and get recharged for another day, but my love never gets used up. And that's what I've always said, that God, and if you relate, the Tao to that to that theory, I've always said that God was light and love, so that makes sense to me, that love is never used up, never depleted. It's always there, whether I'm sleeping or awake, or, it just is for my children unconditionally. And it should be that way for everyone. I can't always say that being a human being, but my children 100%, there's nothing that they could do that would change my love for them.
Absolutely. But so do you think it is possible though for love to be tapped out in certain relationships or situations? Do you feel like there is a limit to love, or is love truly limitless? And then if love is truly limitless, then what is it that most people are walking around feeling if they are able to find limits to their love?
What do you mean by love? I mean, it depends what you mean by love, because love has many different meanings. You know, you don't necessarily love the cinema like you love your child, and you don't necessarily love your child like you love your partner. So love's a difficult one, I think, and also I think it's very, I think love's very easily confused with other feelings. I mean, I had a statement once which was, love is not love unless you can love the unlovable.
Right.
So it's, you know, it's a very difficult thing. It's a very difficult concept. Love, really, we all subscribe to be thinking we're feeling it, and I'm certain. I think at a kind of a fundamental level, um, in terms of parents and children, then certainly, you know, I think that I think that's the closest people come to experiencing perfect love and true love. And that's not to take anything away from anybody who is, you know, feels that kind of level of love for their partner or anything like that. But I think, yeah, and I think it's, you know, it's yeah. I mean, so in that respect, I think obviously love can diminish for other people. People fall out of love all the time, and you know, you can lose your love for something for various reasons. So there are things that can get in the way of love. So I think it's a very tricky one. I think if love is an objective truth, then of course it's eternal. If it's an objective truth, then yes, it's eternal. But as soon as it's subjective, then I think then that we make it subjective. Then I think then obviously it's limited by our character.
Well, I think so. I think that objectively love is eternal, but we cannot view it in our current state without some subjectivity. And that's from, you know, whatever conditioning that we've picked up from childhood onward and kind of cultivated into our understanding of love. Because I think that's the problem, is a lot of people don't understand the levels of love, just like Katie's saying, the layers of love. You know, we say, oh, I love pizza, and then we also say, oh, I love you to our children or our spouse or whatever. So like, how much do you love pizza?
Yeah, quite. And would you have your child sat next to you whilst you're eating pizza, working out where they are in the pecking order of love?
Yeah, exactly. So Katie says, I love you like I love pizza. What's the expression? I love you like a fat kid loves cake. My apologies. Sorry for anyone viewing this who takes offense to that. But I do think as human beings, we at the very least struggle to look at love objectively and unconditionally. I would even say, you know, as much as we say, oh, I love you unconditionally, ultimately as human beings we do have conditions, or else there wouldn't be limits on our love. You know, there wouldn't be breaking points for us to say, nope, enough is enough. I'm no longer moving forward in this way, in this relationship, whether that is a friendship or you know, even a parent child. As someone who has a difficult parent, I know a lot of people in a similar situation who have chosen to go no contact with that parent because of preserving their own mental health. And while I don't feel like I need to take that extreme, there are times when I severely limit my contact, or, you know, because Just like Katie's talking about conditions or boundaries. Um, I do feel like boundaries are essential for our own love of ourselves, right? But what about conditions? Do we put conditions on other people? Do we put conditions on ourselves? I mean, how many times have you looked in the mirror and kind of thought to yourself, well, if this were better, I would probably love myself more, or I would probably treat myself better.
Yeah, for
you know what I
sure.
mean?
Oh, for sure. It's a complex creature, really, isn't it? I think we can all understand, or we can all have a concept of what love is like in its essence, you know, and it's essential for goodness and good living and the preservation of all things good and the continuation of life and all these things. I mean, I always think that anything which is good is something which lends itself to the continuation of our existence, because without our existence, good and bad is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. So we must assume then that all goodness and the forces of good are those things which continue our existence as harmoniously as possible, please. So yeah, it is a struggle sometimes, and I wonder how much of it is a struggle as a consequence of how far we deviated from from our original selves.
Well, you said something earlier about seeing people just for who they are, their authentic selves, without any of our own kind of preconceived notions on them. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes people reflect one another. We can be mirrors for each
That's
other.
for sure. Lord of the
Yeah.
Flies. Well, a good example. That mob mentality.
Mhm.
It's funny. It's very funny how those things can impact us.
Absolutely.
I don't know why I just thought of the maze of mirrors, like at the carnivals. It's just, you get lost in it.
It's interesting how we are afraid to be ourselves
Hmm.
when it's interesting.
Well, some of us even have a hard time finding ourselves after all of it. We just feel lost in it.
And it's interesting how we are sometimes the most afraid of being ourselves when we're in the company of many other people.
I find, at least for me, opening up to people, even people who I love dearly or have known for a long time, is a challenge. I tend to be very guarded, and I wonder if that would be considered a condition, or at the very least a boundary, maybe. But I am sure that even the closest people to me probably have a lot to learn about me. I'm a mystic creature. Katie is in the chat. She says, you can love someone through detachment too. Objectively see them and know they're not their behaviors or emotions, just a soul having a human experience. Absolutely love that, Katie. We do still need to be able to love ourselves by removing toxicity. And I would challenge too that sometimes in removing toxicity, we are kind of also forcing the other person into their own karma as well. Marley mentions that a few times. How many times are we trying to save people and actually just messing up their karma? So sometimes we do have to make these hard decisions because that's a lesson that the other person needs to learn, right? But you are correct, Katie. You say some people don't like being mirrored. I would say most people don't really enjoy being mirrored. Take it from someone who tends to mirror people. Yeah, we do create boundaries for protection, but I would challenge you in that as well, not so much for protection, but like you said before, preservation of our own energy. We can still be giving and selfless with healthy boundaries, I think. What about you guys? Do you think that it's possible to be giving and selfless and still have healthy boundaries?
Yeah, of course.
I agree.
Okay, so any final thoughts, questions before we move on? Oh, I forgot to change the number on that. Sorry. We are on verse 7, but the one over on the right is messed up. Sorry about that. Heaven and earth are everlasting. The reason heaven and earth can last forever is that they do not exist for themselves. Thus, they can last forever. The universe is eternal and earth is lasting. The reason the universe and earth are eternal and lasting is that they do not exist for themselves. That is why they endure. The Tao is infinite, eternal. Why is it eternal? It was never born, thus it can never die. Why is it infinite? It has no desires for itself. Thus, it is present for all beings. So I really love this idea of the Tao not existing for itself. Yes, exactly. A life that is lived in service to others. That's not to say that you never take care of yourself, but I think that serving other people in your life should be an opportunity for great joy. I mean, to me, it's fine to get a gift, right? But if I give someone a gift and it makes them happy, I feel like that's a better gift than the getting of a gift. You know what I mean? To me, it is a gift to give. And I think that that is that kind of um, just joy-filled life. But when we get into an idea of feeling kind of ungrateful because we're always giving, or doing for someone else, how do we bring ourselves back to that pure joy of living just for someone else? Is it possible? Because sometimes I think a lot of us can give more than we should.
That's a deviation from the dad. Then I think there's a I don't want to say a version, but there's an error, if you like. You can be in error whilst doing good, can't you? Good isn't without the potential for error. And the error may not be of any harm to anyone but yourself. So I think
Anybody else got anything for that? So let's see. What number is this? Heaven and earth perform their functions without selfish desires. When we emulate this aspect of nature, we think of others first and ourselves last. By letting go of self-centered thoughts, we can feel the way our inner nature mirrors the greater Tao. When we let this natural mirroring process take place without interference, we become like heaven and earth, existing to be of service to others. Letting go of self-centered thoughts. So, self-centered thoughts, worrying about other people's opinions, worrying about anything in general. I would even say some degree of want. When we find ourselves constantly in want, then we're not really contented where we're at, right? Goodbye, ego. Yeah. The Tao is selfless. All of nature does not seek to live only for itself, but for and with all other beings in symbiosis. Um, I love the idea of symbiotic relationships. I think that um, I wish that humanity existed more in that capacity. I feel like a lot of people have gotten very, very selfish instead of working together. This idea of community just keeps uh, kind of sitting at the forefront of my thoughts, and uh, being able to help one another, and you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. Um, that's how we were made to live anyway. And most likely because we are part of the Tao, and we get corrupted, you know, when we're not connected to that. But I think we naturally are just made to exist, to be in service to one another. Like Jessica was saying earlier, God is love. You know, the Tao is love in the objective, in the purest sense, right? Um, and we can just kind of be in that joy of service to others, and in so doing find our own selves, and be joyful through that. Um, the
You know,
sages, oh, sorry, go ahead. Mhm.
I was thinking earlier when we were talking about love. I just wanted to be in the quiet and just listen for a while. But right now, it also made me think that, when it comes to our children, they are really a part of us. They came from us, right? So that love is it's almost selfish in a way, kind of, sort of, right?
Okay.
If you think, isn't that strange to say?
No,
um,
I don't think
but but
so.
but if we it, taking this from the Bible, right? To love your neighbor like you love yourself. If you think of the concept that we are all one, that we all come essentially from dust and return to dust, right? Is what the Bible says, or something like that. Like if we remember that we are all within this Tao, and we all are made of the same, cells, and same thing. We all bleed the same. It wouldn't be so hard to know love then, if we just really could take that in, that we're all the same and all one.
Yeah, so now you're seeing why society was engineered in the way that it was, to keep us all bickering and separate from one another instead of truly living in fellowship and community.
Is that weird to say it's selfish with the kids? It sounds so weird saying it.
I mean, you do have to realize it from this perspective. They're not yours. As
Right.
much as you love your children, and would give your life from them, ultimately they do not belong to you.
Right.
You are only a steward of them for a time, but they are their own divine soul. You can't hold on to them forever. Now, would you throw yourself in front of a train for your child? I'm sure you would. You'd probably throw yourself in front of a train for someone else's child, because that's just, what a good-natured person would do if they were faced with a choice like that. But now let's shift it up. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that movie, The Good Son, but in that movie, the woman has a son who is a good kid, and she takes in her sister's nephew. I believe her sister passed away or something like that, and he ends up being really rotten, and she has to make a choice at some point, who to save and who not to save. I'm sorry, the nephew was the good kid, and her kid was the rotten kid. And ultimately, she ended up saving her nephew, despite the fact that she loved her son, but she knew he was inherently evil. So I mean, there are extenuating circumstances that you have to consider. At what point, how selfish would you be if you had two children in your household that were from your own body and one was trying to kill the other? What would you do in that situation? Right? I
Yeah.
mean,
That is heavy, but true. It's
yeah.
happened. Yeah.
I think, I think the problem with those kind of questions, and I think that because these sort of questions are asked in like college debates and stuff as well for like philosophy and that sort of thing, you know, it's that old, would you kill an animal, because if you don't kill that animal, two more die as a consequence. The problem for me with those questions is that they usually, for a start, my first question is they typically cast an extreme set of circumstances on you to try and derail like maybe a code or a conduct you live by.
Mhm.
And the second thing is I would offer is if you were in a household where one you love two children and then one started trying to kill the other one, something has gone wrong much further back. And it's supposing that all that's been missed, and all of a sudden you're thrust into this situation. So I always tread carefully with those sorts of questions because I think they're so extreme, and you know they're I don't know. I think I just don't find them. I don't find them too good at truth seeking. You know, helping us to understand the truth because they're usually so artificial and synthetic, and they're out of context as well. You know, I'd like some more context as to why these circumstances have arisen.
Sure.
And if we're talking about somebody who loved the children so much, I just don't envisage them ever falling into a situation where their two children were then trying to be killing each other.
Well, I mean, I appreciate your feedback on this, and this is me just kind of testing extremes.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
No, of course. I mean, you know, hypothetically, it's savage, but there wouldn't be. You would act out of love, regardless. You would not be. You would not, as a loving parent, if you had to end one of those children's life to save the other one. Ultimately, you're left with the same. You're left with the same ending from one perspective. But I don't think during that course of action you'd be acting out of hate.
Yeah, no.
You'd be acting out of love. So where have you gone wrong?
And see, that's you've gotten exactly to the point that I intended.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I used to not answer. I used to get really frustrated with those questions, and I didn't like answering them because it was usually when I was in the depths of Christianity that I'd have my secular friends bombarding me with those kind of extreme circumstances. So, and I'd just refuse to answer.
Well, and there's a reason that the seminaries teach apologetics, because they want people to be able to stand in defense of their faith in these extremes, right? And that's kind of my goal, is to push and goad you guys to look at these extremes, especially because they are uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Because this is not something that we would ever, you know, even, like you said, envision for our own families. But this is a very clear example. Everyone gets this example, at least those of us who are here, because we all have children, and because we would fight to defend them, and we would protect them at all costs, and we would never want anything to happen to them. And for those of us who have multiple children, you know, we know that that would be an unthinkable choice, right? But we do have to sometimes entertain these ideas of unthinkable choices so that we can apply the emotions and the reasoning maybe that comes up from those really kind of jarring questions towards other situations and circumstances in our life that could apply in a similar fashion. Does that make sense? Ultimately, the decision was still made out of love
Yeah.
with the best intentions. Right? And that's the goal. We are doing our best to live for others. And I like what this says here about this, they can last forever, because I feel like a lot of the great people who have brought about great change in the world are still kind of living on in perpetuity. You know, they are living on forever. Their names have been written in history books, there are monuments put up about them. But even those that, you know, are barely a blip on the radar still may have made such a profound difference on many, many lives that there may never be a book written about them, but the selflessness that they showed will go on forever. The love that they showed will go on forever. Even if it wasn't always the right choice, it was still loving,
Mm.
right?
Because I just had a thought whilst we were covering this section, which was the kind of the temptation is to say, well, you know, it's wrong for us to be selfish to some extent. If you look at nature and the animal kingdom, you know, and you listen to you study Darwinism, the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest, and what have you, the necessity of nature. It kind of dictates that things will fight and there'll be conflict, whatnot, and there's a race for power, and male lions will kill each other for breeding rights, and there are many examples of that where there's absolute savagery. And you could then say, well, human beings are just dancing to their DNA, and you know, if I punch some guy in the face, I'm just doing it to demonstrate that I'm superior to him, and I'm an alpha male and he's not, or just as a horrible example. But then so it's easy, I guess, for maybe secular types to suggest that, you know, this is all just normal. There's no good or bad. It's just what's make it so. But human beings aren't like that, are you? Lions don't pack a hamper and take it to their neighbouring pack of lions and say, there you go, hope everything's okay. But you see what I mean? I mean, that's a comical way of looking at it. Human beings do deviate greatly from the natural world. In that sense, at least, you know, we are. And, you know, maybe this is why it is absolutely crucial for us to try and embrace these principles and these philosophies, because of the very fact that, you know, I mean, if you can imagine a society where we all were selfless, no one would have anything to worry about, because the person next to you would be looking after you, and you'd be looking after the person next to you.
And now compound that or add to that unconditional love within that society. You know, that's another thing that the animal kingdom just does not possess or even understand. I think some maybe can understand.
Sure, as the level of intelligence rises, then the more self-aware they become, and typically that's the kind of breeding ground for those kind of acts of selflessness, isn't it?
Yeah, so that consciousness is then important, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So as conscious beings, we should be placing ourselves last, right? But that is going to get us some potential for recognition, whether we want it or not. A genuine selfless desire to be helpful inspires people and wins their respect. Although sages have no wish to draw attention, people single them out and look to them for leadership. Although the sages place themselves last out of humility, the people push them to the forefront into positions of responsibility. Long after the sages have passed on, memories of them endure. People continue to remember with reverence their words and actions. Just like heaven and earth, the legacy of the sages lasts forever. This reminds me of planting seeds. You're always planting seeds. You may not always be tending them or even harvesting them, but you can always be planting seeds. Case in point, Jessica, with Heather seeking you out today. So, any thoughts you'd like to add?
No, not yet.
Um, let's see. Is it not all due to their selflessness? That is how they can achieve their own goals. They are not focused on outcomes or achievements, therefore, they always succeed. She is detached from all things, that is why she is one with them. Because she has let go of herself, she is perfectly fulfilled. So, to be outside of oneself in this context means to be unconcerned with one's well being, to disregard one's body, or to sacrifice oneself. This can be seen as another Tao paradox. We can advance our own selfish agenda by being totally selfless. Lao Tzu was a good example of this. He was content to be a humble, unknown philosopher. He never sought fame and recognition. He never claimed to be divine in any way. And yet, here we are reading his words, which have survived the last 25 centuries and will continue on long after we are gone. Make it a point to put this teaching into practice and see what happens. Spend an entire day living this selfless mindset. You'll discover the world responding to you in wonderful and even miraculous ways. This is exactly what Christ was teaching: selflessness, even self sacrifice. I love this idea of spending an entire day living in this selfless mindset. Now, again, you can be self-sacrificing in that if you want to be, but you can also still take care of yourself in the spaces between living your entire day for others. But I would be excited to see how the world responds. And I think that doing that may require of us some grace for other people. Just, I hope I'm coming across clearly. Like, we have to be willing to exemplify unconditional love. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? We've lost our two fellows, so ladies, help me out. Okay. Let's just pretty sure Justice could come back on, so I'll give her just a second. Pause the recording a minute. The highest goodness resembles water. Water greatly benefits myriad things without contention. It stays in places that people dislike. Therefore, it is similar to the Tao. Dwelling at the right place, heart with great depth, giving with great kindness, words with great integrity, governing with great administration, handling with great capability, moving with great timing, because it does not contend, it is therefore beyond reproach. True goodness is like water. It nurtures everything and harms nothing. Like water, it ever seeks the lowest place, the place that all others avoid. This is the way of the Tao. For a dwelling, it chooses the quiet meadow. For a heart, the circling eddy. In generosity, it is kind. In speech, it is sincere. In power, it is order. In action, it is gentle. In movement, it is rhythm. Because it is always peaceable, it soothes and refreshes. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. Whew. Katie says, like Bruce Lee said, be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Love that. Okay. So let's take a look at all these notes. We got a lot of notes for number 8 here. Water is the most fitting metaphor for the Tao. Water always flows to the lowest place, not because it is forced to do so, but because it follows its own nature. We also place ourselves lower, not because we contrive to do so, but because it is our nature to be humble. This I found very interesting. Is it really our nature to be humble, or do we tend toward recognition and praise? I would say generally it would be the latter for most people. Most people are seeking some sort of recognition or praise or attention, especially now in
Probably-
social media times.
Yeah, I was going to say as a byproduct of living in society.
There's a lot of attention seeking right now. And how do we balance that? How do we put goodness out into the world without it being a call for attention?
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And then the problem with that is if you flip that on its head is how do we do any good without it being calling for attention? Because there if you can go onto many social media outlets now and see people who are donating money to charity and doing it publicly, and then the volley of abuse they get underneath. Oh, you're only doing that for likes. You're only doing that for sarcasm. Oh, well, you're in a position, or you're in a privileged position, so you can afford to do it. And then it just goes on and on and on and on. So we have become a world of cynics, which is difficult because we're also living in a world of truths and untruths and just absolutely being volleyed with so much conflicting information that no wonder we're all cynical. But so yeah, it's a tricky one. But I always think that when I see those posts when people are doing something like there's one where the guy just goes up. There's loads where they'll test somebody else's generosity first. So, excuse me, sir, have you got $1 for so I can just get home? And then they'll show 3 or 4 people say, no, I'm not interested, or leave me alone. And then they'll show one person, and then they'll give that person their $1 back, and then say, look, I wanted to bless somebody there, here's $500. And some emotive music will be playing in the background. And then obviously then there's a sort of a split between people who are like, oh, that's so great. I was thinking you're so good watching this. And then there's other people who go, oh, you know, just it's just such a big con, it's just virtue signaling and all that. And sometimes I sit there and I think, well, it does actually make me feel like going out and being kind.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you why, because it's making me feel euphoric. It's making me feel happy inside and a positive emotional way. And that's an incredible feeling. You know, but when you detach it from everything else around it, just that feeling, that euphoric feeling of kindness. And sometimes it's far more simple. There's some guy who drives past in his car and just goes, "Excuse me, miss, I love your hair today. Excuse me, sir, save some ladies for the rest of us." And these sorts of comments, and it's wonderful. You see the stranger smiling and laughing, and it really does make you feel good. And it always inspires me to try some of that, and but just be nice about it. And so I think regardless of whether what you want to sort of think about it, how is it making you feel from a very raw level? Because acts of kindness and good, when you don't think about them and just see them, typically make you feel good, and they also make you want to do good. So
yeah, I agree.
yeah.
And so there's that. It's an interesting conversation because within our church we were having that very same thing. I think we talked about this last
Yes.
week. You know, the church was virtue signaling,
Yeah.
right? And it, in one sense, I could see where it could, where at least they perceived it to be something that would spur others to do good. I think it was kind of poorly displayed, perhaps.
Yeah.
Like the intentions were in the right place, but maybe the execution was
Well,
poor, you know.
Yeah, I kind of agree with your original focus on that, though, or a focus we at least entertained, because I've seen organisations, and I used to be part of one, that would ask for generosity from others and then demonstrate it as their own generosity, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's something different. That's not as subtle as I think they'd hope it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I have seen that, and I do recognise that, and I do think that there's maybe an example where I'd be more cautious and would ask others to as well.
I mean, I can watch those videos of someone doing something good like that, like what you had just mentioned. I can watch those videos and cry like a baby.
Yeah.
You know, I love those kinds of videos. But at the same time, I always think, how did that person feel? Especially when it's like a homeless person. Say someone goes up and gives a homeless person some money, and then they record them for a while, and they find out that the homeless person didn't just go to the liquor store or go to the local drug dealer, but they actually went and bought things for other homeless people and then took it to them, and you know, they just kind of follow them around through all that, and those are just so moving. But I have to wonder, what is that person feeling when they realize that someone has just filmed their generosity? Does that make them feel, oh, it's good that I was able to let someone else see that? Or does that make them feel embarrassed, or like it kind of negates their efforts? Like they just wanted to do good for the sake of doing good, not necessarily to make a big stink about it. You know, do your giving in secret. Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. You know what I mean? For me personally, when I was confronted with the camera in my face, it wasn't a comfortable feeling, because I just wanted to do good without needing it to be publicized. Just let people do their thing. So it's kind of, you know, I can see it from both perspectives. It definitely can spur people to do great things, but at the same time, are you dehumanizing them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And maybe that's not the right word, but I just feel like it's kind of taking some of the magic away from just being humans. You know, it's so simple. We're just being humans.
Yeah, sure.
But, oh, let's record it because it's so amazing and rare. It shouldn't be rare.
Yeah.
that's just the way we should be as human beings. I don't know.
I think that's, I mean, yeah, I mean, I had a long conversation with you about one of the organizations I was with. We were warned very early on that to be very careful of broadcasting acts of kindness and generosity, and with the advice or the warning being that ultimately your motivation can change, and when that happens, you can fall apart very quickly. And guess what happens? Yeah,
Yeah.
catastrophically as well.
That's the way it works.
So,
That's the way it works. Because it's no longer from a place of humility. It's serving some ulterior motive.
Of course, well, yes, the danger, yeah.
Should be hanging just inside the basement door. Dad might need to help you with a saw.
The devil is in the details.
Well, I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, is it not?
And many other sayings.
Well, I mean, think about it though. Even sometimes our best intentions are selfish in nature or misguided in some way because we have some sort of ulterior motive. And how often do you see people living from a position of no ulterior motive? It's rare. It's very rare.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, of course, certainly it is. It is. I think some of that can be counted like some sort of confession. So some. I mean, I think like you can probably do good and say, look, I'm going to level with you. It does make me feel fantastic as well. I love getting praise from people on social media. Say, well done, John. Da 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 da. I think that counters it to some extent when you're honest with it. But I think obviously the problem is there are probably a lot of bodies out there that have a very kind of direct motivation for doing it other than just for just being kind and being good,
Well, and you bring up
that's
an interesting point because the they that we were talking about earlier, right? The L-ites or whatever you want to call them, these people who are doing things because they want the fame or the glory or
or to be
whatever.
trusted.
And the fact that they are willing to put it out there in plain sight, like, oh well, really, I'm doing this because of this, and no one's any the wiser. And meanwhile, they're tipping the scales out of balance. So, what does it truly mean to live from a place of selflessness in order to rebalance that scale? How do we do that? Because obviously, we are not in a position to be able to change the minds of the people who are in high places. But I think that we can collectively change the consciousness of humanity through our own thoughts and ideas and our own actions towards one another. So how would we do that? How would we bring people together instead of continuing to divide?
Yeah.
Or are we supposed to?
Yeah. G.K. Chesterton said that there was a contradiction. It's going to be a massive misquote now, I'm sure, but he recognised there being a contradiction in Western living in that we typically look down our noses at the successful while simultaneously trying to get those who are in the dirt up to a level of success.
Mm-hmm.
So
and what if the people that are living in the dirt feel like they have reached the level of success for them? There are some people that do want to live in the most minimal existence. Right. And we're over here, blaming them or thinking there's something wrong.
What do you say to a person who has nothing?
Exactly.
Throw it away.
Exactly. It's amazing how often we worry about trying to change other people when really we just need to change ourselves. Okay, so number 2, dwelling at the right place, heart with great depth. A deep pool of water is much more than its surface. Likewise, there's more to a Tao cultivator than meets the eye. The more people get to know us, the more they will discover. We are like onions, are we not? Giving with great kindness. Water provides its benefits and moves on without waiting for any benefits in return. We benefit others in the same way. When we provide assistance, we do so with no strings attached. I have a little note over here. Plant the seed and keep on walking. So in the church, I was taught that some people are responsible for planting the seed. Some people are responsible for watering that seed. Some people are responsible for harvesting that seed. And the person who planted it may not always be the person that harvests it. And that comes with a certain level of detachment, which I think kind of lends a little bit to what Katie was saying earlier about, being able to love someone just as they are through detachment. No matter what you have said or done or how much you have poured into that person, it may not be your destiny to watch them, attain a higher level of existence to, according to your standards. You know what I mean? Sometimes we just have to be willing to plant the seed and keep on walking. So we were talking a little bit earlier about being mirrors, and water reflects its surroundings and does not hide or change anything in its reflection. We conduct ourselves with this same sense of integrity and accuracy. People come to trust us because they realize we will give them the truth when no one else will. I feel like that's a really important trait that is kind of few and far between. Someone who's willing to tell you the truth, even if they know it's going to hurt. And at what point does at what point do we stop considering how it's going to make the other person feel when it comes to expressing the truth? Is it when we know that that person is doing harm to themselves or someone else? Do we just continue telling them, oh yeah, no, everything's just fine, and really their life is a flaming dumpster fire? I mean, at what point do we offer guidance and it from a place of love and be willing to say, hey, look, these are the things that I'm seeing, and these are the things that maybe need to change in your life in order for your life to improve. And when does that become stepping on someone's toes or overstepping their boundaries?
I mean, you don't know, you can roll the dice. So that's an act of that. I mean, again, that's actually out of love, and isn't it, to take that plunge and decide, right, I've got to say something, and an intervention is necessary, or what have you. So yeah, so that is a difficult one. I've been in many a situation where I've dwelled on a sort of an awkward situation, not being able to, not wanted to say something, because I'm just like, I just know the amount of drama and chaos it's going to cause, and so not speaking is typically, I guess, out of fear of it having an impact on my life that I wouldn't otherwise wish.
But then is that selfish?
Of course, yeah, of course it is. Yeah,
I don't want to experience it, so I'm just not going to say anything about it.
Of course,
but at what cost?
And it's cowardly as well.
And you, because you don't know if something that you say to someone could potentially completely change the direction of their lives, that could go for the better, or could go for the worse.
Well, one of the quotes from the Bible is to season your words with salt, meaning that you have to change the way you speak from person to person, and that's not being two-faced or artificial. It's being adaptive and considering the different people in front of you, I guess, and how they might respond. So I guess there are people who are suited to certain roles and positions. Some people are very well suited to talking to and giving, being sages and giving people advice and stuff. And there are, I guess, there are going to be other people who are less skilled at that. And, they may have their talents or skills in in some other area, maybe in encouragement, to encourage somebody to do something they've been dwelling on for a while, which would do them. But I don't know, it's a tricky one. But telling somebody that they're doing something wrong is one of the most difficult things in this day and age. We live in an age now, and I've said this before, where people are prepared to live, believe, people will completely dismiss the supernatural in this day and age. We live in we're the most secular age in human history, and people are not prepared to believe in anything supernatural, but they will believe in something supernatural or something without empirical evidence, so long as that doesn't suggest they have to change their ways. So people will believe in the afterlife and ghosts and spirits, and people will believe in extraterrestrial life and all these things that there's no empirical, and I choose to say that word carefully, empirical evidence for. Yet when you then propose God to them, then they will put their foot down and say, no, I'm not believing in that because there's no empirical evidence for it. Well, there's no empirical evidence for extraterrestrial life. We know the universe can sustain life because we're here. However, on the subject of extraterrestrial life, there's no evidence for it. And there's no evidence, that's not to say I don't believe it, but there's no empirical evidence for the afterlife. However, people love to believe in that, but they won't believe in God because people don't like being told what they're doing is wrong. And that's the same with this subject here. When you say to somebody, look, mate, or look, friend, for American audience,
This is a worldwide audience.
You're doing something wrong. I'm telling you, you need to stop what you're doing. You're damaging yourself and you're damaging people around you. There's a very good chance that you're going to be met with fire and brimstone.
Yeah, well, so
and that's pride. That's the sin of pride, is it not? If somebody gives you good advice, but it's not what you want to hear, so you bite them for it, it's pride. And that's all it is.
So, in the study of human design, I have learned that I am a projector, and that means I'm the kind of person that can see a big picture idea for someone else that they may not necessarily be able to see themselves. So I can give them guidance, but if they don't want it, it doesn't matter how much I try to lead that horse to water, they're not going to drink.
Sure.
But the trick is to make them believe it was their idea.
Yeah.
Once you make them believe it was their idea, it's so simple for them to change their minds because they came up with it themselves, even though they may not have. You planted the seed and they cultivated it on their own, and that is I think that is one of the quintessential capabilities of a true sage or a shaman that can allow an idea or philosophy to take root in someone else's mind without pushing. We always hear, at least here in the States, we hear, oh, they're a Bible thumper. They'll just hit you over the head with the Bible and beat you to death with it.
Yeah.
But do you have to? No. I saw a video today. It was so beautiful. The woman was talking about how Christians always say, oh, the love of Christ, where do you feel the love of Christ? But they never actually show anyone the love of Christ. They don't support them and love them and care for them the way they would for someone from their own family, and we have to come at this from that perspective. We can give loving guidance, but ultimately it's not really gonna matter if they're not even in a position to hear it anyway. So we have to be willing to let that seed flow like water right through it, allow them to see their own reflection, as uncomfortable as it may be, because ultimately they're going to keep flowing forward just as we are, just they may not flow in the same time. you know. It's quiet in the chat. I hope you're okay there, Katie. Water administers to everything equally. It slakes the thirst of the kind person just as it does the unkind person. Thus, we also do not pick and choose the recipients of the benefits we provide. So this is a challenging one. I feel like generally speaking, we tend to be those who would want to give more to people that we care about or that we know are going to do something with it, right? There tends to be conditions on our giving, right? It brought to mind Matthew 5. This is shortly after Jesus gives what's called the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor, blessed, you know. But this says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, this is not to boast about being perfect or anything, but so a couple of weeks ago, we helped an elderly man get a dog out from under the car, and he sat and he chatted with us for a while. And do you remember Pops? And I know I saw him a few days ago, but you know, he sat on the porch for a while. We offered him some stuff, but he didn't want to take anything. He did say he was homeless, but just to have him sit here and chat and take a break on our porch, and it was nice to be able to talk to someone who, for me, I first went outside because I'm thinking, why is there a man around my car? You know what I mean? But to see that, you know, he needed help and he was just a guy walking down the street. We could have easily passed judgment and just shoot him away. No, 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 get away from our car, you know. But we learned that he was actually a pretty nice guy and he had his struggles. And you know, if you give people space to be themselves and you don't immediately pass judgment on whether or not they're good or bad, you get to meet some really interesting people, you know. I think it's funny the way Jess and Caleb met, because they met in the comments section of an Instagram post in which they disagreed with one another. They were arguing with one another, but they were able to come out the other side of that with, you know, an understanding and mutual respect for one another.
Now they love each other.
To death. Just to pieces.
And they still argue. Wonderful.
Yeah, just closer.
It's like when we disagree.
I think it's a unique ability for humans, you know, that kind of distinguishes us a little bit from the animal kingdom, in that we can have a discussion where we disagree with one another, but it doesn't have to be a dispute. It doesn't have to be a brawl like in a wild, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And that's that gets in the way hugely. I think sometimes, and you know, I've listened to talks on how to debate with people, and it is a fine art. It's not something which is easy, and many people will end up rowing with each other and talking over each other and getting upset and perturbed, right? And I think one of the golden rules is to, regardless of how much you disagree with somebody's opinion, is just ask them questions respectfully, take an interest in what they've got to say, because as soon as they recognise that you're taking an interest in what they have to say, regardless of if you agree or not, they'll start doing the same thing.
Yeah, their demeanor will change.
Of course, yes, for sure. Never tell
Get more
somebody they're
bees with
wrong.
honey.
Never tell somebody they're wrong.
Oh, now see, I would challenge you on that. Just because I think that there is a way to do that. You
Yeah.
can tell someone they're wrong
Of
with
course.
diplomacy, with
Yeah.
tact and
Of
grace.
course,
you
of
know.
course.
But generally speaking, yeah, just you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar, right?
Yeah.
It's better to just say, "Oh yes, you're right."
Well, yeah, not necessarily like that. I meant literally. If you say to somebody you're wrong, it doesn't end well. Usually, if you say that's a really interesting point, if I could offer you an alternative perspective, and that's what you can do really. You can only and you stand a better chance of delivering your perspective when you don't tell the other person they're wrong before you deliver your perspective. Because
No, you're wrong.
this is the truth. Boom, finished.
But because people close off from that.
Yeah, of course, yeah, and that's what you don't want if you're having a debate.
But their laws were clean. Water is versatile. It conforms to the shape of any container. Following this, we also cultivate flexibility and adaptability. Because the world is continually changing, we make constant adjustments to handle new challenges. So there's that adaptability you mentioned earlier, John. We can adapt. Whether it takes the form of rain or snow, water follows the timing of natural events. We are the same way. We live each day following its natural flow and take appropriate actions at the appropriate times. I would say that not all of us live according to the natural flow of the day. Many do, but I think a lot of people really fight against that, and I think that's why we have a lot of mental health issues, especially, and even physical health issues, is because there's some sort of resistance. People are fighting against something instead of living in accordance with the flow of life. So the last slide that I have here is just some examples of how water can be. So we have a sweet little babbling brook, a raging river, a glass of water, a perfectly still lake, and this last one here is the battle with the Flying Dutchman from Pirates of the Caribbean when they were being sucked into a whirlpool. But I just wanted to kind of express the different ways in which water flows through life. So we, being like water and flowing with the Tao, are all of these aspects. We can be calm and still when we need to be, or we can be a raging river at the appropriate times. Obviously, if you're sitting in the middle of a quiet service and you suddenly lash out in madness, then chances are that's probably not the right time to be that sort of aspect of water. But when we are learning to flow through life with, some passion, sometimes we need to kind of like hit something head on. That's the time to be the raging river. And sometimes being a perfectly still glass of water isn't any more ideal than being a raging river. It just is. Sometimes our stillness can be a problem. Sometimes our action can be a problem. So somewhere in the middle is probably the best place to be. At least most of the time. So that is all I had for this evening. Final thoughts, questions, comments?
I thought the comparison to the Tao and water was really fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it's when they were referring to the Tao as everything, the perfect balance of things. When you think about what water actually is, I mean, it's liquid, it can be solid, it's comprised of gases. It's at the top of the highest mountain. It is the bottom of the ocean. it's
Life of the earth.
It's in the skies. We are predominantly comprised of water. When we die, the water will escape our bodies and end up back in the sky.
But I'm thinking about like the research that people like Luc Montagnier and Matsuri Emoto did with water and seeing how it has this sort of memory to it. I would dare say that water is life. I mean, at least on this planet, we cannot have life without water. It's a necessity. This is life. So this this idea of the Tao flowing and being like water, giving us life, giving us sustenance, reminds me a lot of the idea in the Hebrew concept of the Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Holy Spirit, this breath of life that's always kind of flowing in and through everything. Um, this is the Tao. Right? We're just kind of filled with life force, surrounded by life force, in a life soup.
Life soup.
Yes. That's all I got for you guys.
Good.
All right. Our turn. Any final thoughts, Katie? I've seen a couple of hearts you put up there. Maybe a couple of chaos going on. Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for all of your input. Thank you as well, John, for all of your input. Thank you for being here all quietly, holding the center for us all. And thank you everyone else for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now, and then we can end our program.